There are moments in life you don't forget. Not because they were beautiful, but because they changed everything. This is the story of a love that was real. A love that existed for a long time only in the dark. Love in Iris. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that button and turn on notifications, because this story will keep you from the very first word to the very last. My name is Rachel. I am 31 years old. I am a licensed pharmacist. I have been married for 5 years to Daniel, and I live in a quiet neighborhood called Maple Grove on the east side of Nashville, Tennessee. I am not wealthy. I am not struggling. I am one of those women who works hard, keeps the house running, raises a child, and tries not to complain too much about the life she built. Our house has a front porch, a white picket fence, and a rose bush I planted the first year we were married. From the outside, it looks like the perfect life, and for a long time I believed it was. It was a Sunday morning in August of 2009. I was sitting in the 4th row of our Baptist church, right side, same spot every week. Daniel had come in late, like always, and leaned down to kiss my forehead in front of everyone. The women around us smiled. I smiled too. That was when she walked in. I had never seen that woman before in my life. She came through the side door, scanned the crowded room, and without any hesitation sat down in the same row as me, about 4 seats to my left. Hair pulled back in a messy bun, plain blue blouse, a canvas tote bag instead of a purse. Nothing remarkable about her at all. And yet something made it impossible for me to keep my eyes on the pulpit for the next several minutes. The entire service I sat there with that strange feeling of someone who is paying attention to 2 things at the same time. The pastor was preaching. Daniel was holding my hand. And I kept stealing glances at that woman I had never seen in my life, trying to understand why her presence made me feel so unsettled. At the end of the service, Donna, my mother-in-law, came to hug me the way she always does. She knows everyone in that congregation, and she already had her eye on the newcomer. She said it was probably that new teacher they brought in for the public school over on Birchwood. Someone from out of state. She said it with no malice at all. Just information. The way Donna always talks. I went home, served lunch, gave Lily her bath, and sat on the couch while Daniel napped. And for reasons I could not explain to myself, I kept thinking about the way that woman had folded the corner of her hymnal while she was singing. Not her face. The gesture. Just that small, absent-minded gesture. It stayed with me the entire afternoon in a way I did not know how to categorize. Monday morning I left the house early to open the pharmacy and nearly walked straight into her on the sidewalk. She was moving fast, backpack over one shoulder, clearly running behind. We bumped, she apologized, and I realized she was renting the house 3 doors down from mine. She said her name was Lauren. Teacher. Just moved up from Austin, Texas. Had been in Nashville less than a week. That week, we said good morning on the sidewalk every day. Short conversations, neighborly small talk. She was direct, had a voice that was slightly husky in the mornings, and laughed easily. I found myself thinking about it at the pharmacy during the slow hours of the afternoon without being able to explain why. Sandra, my co-worker, asked me once if I was feeling all right. I told her I was just tired. On Friday of that week, Daniel left for a work trip, 3 days out of town like usual. I put Lily to bed, sat down at the computer, and without really thinking about it, opened AOL Instant Messenger. Lauren was online. We ended up talking until almost midnight. About Nashville, about teaching, about how different Tennessee felt from Texas. Nothing significant. But when I finally went to bed, I realized it had been the first time in a long while that I had lost track of the hours. That night, before I turned off the lamp, I opened the notebook I kept hidden inside a box of tampons under the bathroom sink. A journal Daniel did not know existed. I did not write anything. I just sat there looking at the blank page for a few minutes. Then I closed it and went to sleep. When Daniel came back on Sunday, he brought flowers and cooked dinner. He was attentive and warm, and everything a husband is supposed to be. And while I stood at the sink washing dishes and he put Lily to bed down the hall, I noticed that I'd been waiting all evening for him to fall asleep so I could open the computer, and that scared me a great deal more than I was ready to admit. In the weeks that followed, Lauren became part of my routine without me noticing exactly when it happened. In the mornings, we crossed paths on the sidewalk. At night, when Lily was asleep and Daniel was out of town, I opened AOL Instant Messenger, and she was there. We talked about everything and nothing, about movies we had never gotten around to watching, about songs we loved, about the lives we had each built for ourselves. It was easy. It was light. And I no longer knew what it would feel like without it. One of those nights she mentioned she had a boyfriend. Cole, an engineer based in Atlanta, long-distance relationship, had been together for years. She said it the way someone mentions the weather. Casually, without weight. I told her that was nice, asked if he visited often, and kept typing with hands that had gone completely cold without my understanding why that piece of information had unsettled me the way it did. I started noticing small things I had no business noticing. The perfume she wore on school mornings. Something light and clean that I could catch from my porch if the wind was right. The way she furrowed her brow when she was thinking hard about something. Her laugh, which was loud enough to hear from my front yard when she was on the phone in her driveway. I would stand there pretending to water the rose bush just to hear a little more of it. It was around that time I started writing in the journal again. I did not write her name. I wrote things like, "I cannot stop thinking, and I think something might be wrong with me." I wrote once, in handwriting smaller than usual, as if the page itself might betray me. She laughed, and I wanted to freeze that second forever. This is not friendship. I closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. Daniel noticed nothing. He came back from his trips with little presents for Lily, hugged me in the kitchen, asked about my day. He was a genuinely good man. I never doubted that. And that was precisely what made everything harder, because I had no reason to feel the way I was feeling. But the heart does not ask for permission. One night around 1 a.m, my phone rang. I answered without checking the number and heard Lauren's slightly husky voice on the other end. She said, "Hey, I called the wrong number. I am so sorry." I told her it was completely fine. She said she would hang up, but neither one of us hung up. We stayed on the line in silence for almost 2 full minutes, just breathing, not saying a word to each other. Then she disconnected. I lay there watching the ceiling until the sun came up. The next morning on the sidewalk, we said good morning like nothing had happened. She smiled, asked about Lily, and headed off toward school. I walked into the pharmacy, sat down behind the counter, and Sandra asked if I had slept badly. I said yes. She did not ask anything else, but she looked at me in a way that told me she was filing that look away for later. That same week, Lauren's profile showed up in my AOL buddy list suggestions. Her away message that week read, "Taken and happy." Her profile picture was her smiling in sunglasses at what looked like a state park, somewhere green and distant. I stared at that picture longer than I should have. Then I closed the laptop, went to pick up Lily from daycare, and tried very hard not to think about it anymore. But on Friday, she knocked on my door with a plate of brownies left over from a staff appreciation event at school. She said she did not want them to go to waste. Lily ran to her immediately, wrapping both arms around Lauren's legs and saying her name in that way. Toddlers say the names of people they have decided to love completely and without condition. Lauren crouched down, picked Lily up, and looked at me over my daughter's head with a smile so genuine and unguarded that I had to turn toward the kitchen to find a plate, just to have somewhere to put my face for a moment. That night, with Daniel asleep down the hall and Lily quiet in her room, I opened the journal again. I wrote one sentence. I read it 3 times. Then I tore the page out, ripped it into pieces small enough that no one could ever put it back together, and dropped it in the bathroom trash. I cannot tell you here what that sentence said, but anyone who has ever felt it knows exactly what it was. Donna came for Sunday lunch that week. She is the kind of woman who sees everything but says only half of what she sees. Halfway through the meal, without looking at anyone in particular, she said, "Rach, you seem different lately. More distant somehow." Daniel laughed and said I was just worn out from work. Donna looked at me. I smiled, and I changed the subject. September arrived, and Lauren invited me over for coffee on a Saturday afternoon when Daniel had taken Lily to his mother's house. I went. I sat at her kitchen table, drank coffee with a slice of lemon pound cake she had made from scratch, and we talked for nearly 3 hours without noticing the time. When I finally looked at the clock and said I had to get going, she walked me to the door and said, "Come back whenever you want." I walked home slowly, in no hurry at all, knowing that something between us had shifted, and that there was no going back to whatever it had been before. It was a Thursday evening in October, close to 6 in the afternoon, when the storm rolled in without warning the way Nashville storms do in the fall, one of those heavy southern downpours that soaks everything in under 5 minutes and turns the streets into rivers. I was locking up the pharmacy. Sandra had already left, and when I killed the lights and looked through the front glass, I saw Lauren standing on the sidewalk across the street, completely drenched, holding her canvas tote bag over her head in a hopeless attempt to stay dry. I unlocked the door and called her inside. She came in laughing that laugh of hers, shaking the rain out of her hair, saying she had lost track of time grading papers at the school library and missed the last bus by about 30 seconds. I went to the back room and found a small hand towel we kept near the utility sink, brought her a cup of water from the cooler, and we stood there waiting for the storm to pass. The pharmacy was empty. The overhead lights were off and only the back counter light was on, the rain hitting the awning outside in sheets. And between us there was a silence that was not uncomfortable at all. The kind of silence that only exists between people who already know each other in some way that goes beyond the number of conversations they have had. She spoke first. She asked me if I was okay. Not the way people ask when they are filling space in a conversation. She asked it looking directly at me, the way someone asks when they actually need to know the answer. And I, who had been saying I am fine on autopilot for months, opened my mouth and nothing came out. I just stood there, my eyes filling, realizing I was already crying before I understood why. I turned toward the counter and pretended to straighten a row of vitamin bottles. I told her it was just exhaustion, that it had been a hard month, that it was nothing serious. She did not believe me. She was quiet for a moment, and then said softly, "You do not have to pretend with me, Rachel." And it was that sentence, said in that simple and direct way of hers, that broke something open inside me. I cried for real after that. Not the neat kind of crying you see in movies, the kind that comes without announcement, that makes your shoulders shake and your breath uneven. I gripped the edge of the counter with both hands. She did not rush to hold me. She stood beside me in silence, close enough that I could feel her presence, and waited. When I could finally breathe normally again, I said something I had never said out loud to anyone in my life. I said I do not know what is happening to me. I only know that when you are nearby, I breathe differently. The silence that followed that sentence was the longest of my life. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes fixed on the vitamin bottles on the shelf in front of me, burning with embarrassment, waiting for her to say something that would help me take it back. To tell me I was being dramatic, that it was just friendship, that everything was going to be fine. She did not say any of that. She took my hand. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was slow and careful, the way you pick up something fragile. She reached across and took my hand and held it, and I finally turned and looked at her. The image froze in my memory at that exact moment. Her face with her hair still damp from the rain, the low amber light of the pharmacy counter, the storm quieting outside, and that look I could not fully decode, but that made me feel something I had not felt in years, something I was not certain I had ever felt quite that way. We stayed like that for a length of time I could not measure. It might have been 1 minute. It might have been 10. When the rain stopped completely, she released my hand slowly. She did not tell me she loved me. She did not say she felt the same way. She only said, "I know." Just those 2 words. And it was the most complete answer anyone had ever given me. She left when the rain cleared. I stayed inside the dark pharmacy after she went, standing in the same spot, looking at the closed door. Then I picked up my bag, turned off the last light, and walked out into the wet evening air. The sky after the storm was that particular shade of deep blue and amber that only exists in Tennessee in October after the rain moves through. And I thought to myself, something has changed today, and there is no undoing it. I got home, warmed up the dinner I had left ready, and when Daniel called from his trip to ask how my day had been, I told him normal. Everything was fine. Lily climbed into my lap and played with my hair while I talked on the phone. And I remember thinking, I love this child more than anything in this world. I respect this man. And even so, something inside me is completely off its foundation. That night, I opened the journal. I wrote 3 words, closed it, hid it back inside the box under the sink. I will not tell you what those 3 words were. But if you have ever lived through a moment when your heart admits a truth your mind was not ready to accept, you already know what was written there. In the days that followed, neither of us spoke about what had happened in the pharmacy. We returned to the routine of good mornings on the sidewalk and conversations on AOL Instant Messenger at night. But something had changed in the air between us. An understanding that did not need words. A code only the 2 of us could read. A song that came on the radio that became a message. A light on in her window at 11 at night that told me she was still awake. And I knew, somewhere deep and certain, that we were walking toward something. I just did not yet know the price that road was going to ask us to pay. It was a Saturday morning when Lauren knocked on my door with an expression I had never seen on her before. Not sadness exactly, more like the face of someone carrying something heavy and not yet sure where to set it down. I was still in my pajamas. Lily was watching cartoons in the living room. Daniel was out of town. I let her in without asking a single question. She sat down at my kitchen table, accepted the coffee I poured her, and stared at the mug for a long moment without drinking. Then she said Cole is coming to visit next week, and he is bringing a ring. I was standing on the other side of the kitchen island. I did not sit down. I could not. I asked if she had known before. She said she had suspected, but that now it was confirmed. He had called to tell her it was happening. I turned to the sink and washed a coffee mug that was already clean. I washed it slowly and carefully, just to have something to do with my hands while I tried to organize what I was feeling. Lauren sat watching me in silence from the table. After a moment, she said quietly, "I do not know what I am going to do." And I said, still not turning around, "You do not have to know right now." But I knew, standing there at that sink with the water running over my hands, that this was the beginning of a pressure that was only going to grow. Cole arrived the following Thursday evening. He was tall and easy to talk to, the kind of man who fills a room without trying, good-looking in that clean-cut way that reads well in family photographs. And on Saturday at noon, without any warning, Daniel ran into him at the hardware store on Gallatin Road, struck up a conversation, and invited him and Lauren over for lunch. Just like that, without asking me first, because that is exactly the kind of man Daniel is. I got the text message at 11:30. "Hey babe, invited the neighbor and her boyfriend for lunch. Hope that's okay." I stood in the middle of the kitchen holding my phone for a long time. Then I typed back, "Of course, no problem at all," and went to put on a pot of rice for 4 people with hands that were not entirely steady. They arrived at noon. Lauren came through my front door with an expression that only I knew how to read, that combination of apology and quiet desperation in her eyes, while Cole and Daniel were already talking about the Tennessee Titans in the hallway like they had known each other for years. I set the table. I poured the sweet tea. I called Lily in from the backyard, and I sat down in a chair in my own home, feeling completely outside of everything happening around me. Lunch lasted almost 2 hours. Cole was attentive to Lauren in the way that good boyfriends are, refilling her glass, passing her the bread basket, resting his hand briefly on her shoulder when he laughed. And she let him, with a smile I knew was not complete. Daniel told his best stories and kept everyone's glass full. Lily decided, for reasons only 3-year-olds understand, that Cole was her new favorite person and spent most of the meal trying to climb into his lap. And I smiled and offered more food and got up to refill things and did everything a good hostess does. At some point during the meal, Lauren and I looked at each other across the table while the two men were deep in conversation. It lasted 2 seconds at the most. She blinked slowly. I looked back down at my plate. And that silence between us inside all the noise of that lunch was the loneliest thing I had ever felt in my life. When they finally left, Daniel was in a great mood, said Cole was a terrific guy, said we should all get together again before the holidays. I agreed with everything, washed the lunch dishes, put Lily down for her nap, and went to the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub with the door locked for about 20 minutes. I did not cry. I just sat there. That same week, Donna organized a surprise to celebrate our 5-year wedding anniversary. A vow renewal at the church, a small ceremony with family and close friends. She had planned the whole thing without telling me. And because Lauren had become a familiar face in the neighborhood by then, she was invited as well. I stood at the front of that church holding Daniel's hand, repeating the words the pastor led us through, holding a bouquet of white roses Donna had chosen. And at some point I raised my eyes to the small gathering seated in the pews and found Lauren in the second row. She was sitting very still with her hands folded in her lap, watching me with an expression I have never been able to find the right words for. Not pity, not longing exactly. Something older and quieter than either of those things. I looked back at the pastor and finished the ceremony. That night, while Daniel celebrated beside me at the small reception Donna had put together in the church fellowship hall, I felt my phone buzz in my jacket pocket. A text from Lauren. 1 sentence. "You were beautiful up there." I deleted it before Daniel could see the screen light up. I went to sleep that night, knowing that what we were living inside could no longer fit only in the dark, and that sooner or later someone was going to turn on the lights, whether we were ready or not. January of 2010 came in cold and gray, the way Nashville winters do, when they finally decide to mean it. I was at the pharmacy on a Wednesday afternoon close to 6 when Lauren pushed open the front door. It was not unusual for her to stop by. But that afternoon she was different. Her eyes were red in the particular way that means crying happened before leaving the house, not during the walk over. I sent Sandra to restock the back shelves and waved Lauren inside. She told me she and Cole had fought over the phone the night before. He was pushing for a wedding date. She had asked for more time and he had not taken it well. She did not tell me everything. I could feel the part of the story she was holding back, the part that had her name and mine in it, the part that was too honest to say out loud just yet. I did not push. I stood beside her and listened. And when she finished talking, I did what felt natural without thinking about whether it was wise. I held her. It was a long embrace, the kind you give someone when words have run out and presence is the only thing left that means anything. She rested her head against my shoulder and went quiet. I had one hand on her back, and my chin resting against her hair, and I could smell the shampoo she used. Something warm and familiar that I had learned without meaning to. The way you learn the small details of someone who has moved into the center of your life. It was not a friendly hug. We both knew that, and we both said nothing about it. What neither of us knew was that Sandra had come back from the shelves. She did not say anything in the moment. I do not know exactly what she saw, but I saw her face when I looked up, and that expression told me everything. The expression of someone who has just understood something they were not expecting to understand. She covered quickly, said she had forgotten her car keys, picked up her purse from behind the counter, said goodnight, and left. I stood in the middle of that pharmacy, with my heart somewhere in the vicinity of my throat. In the days that followed, Sandra said nothing to me directly, but I have worked alongside that woman for 4 years, and I know her silences the way I know the layout of my own store. She became quieter around me, more watchful, studying me during slow moments in a way that was different from before. And on a Friday afternoon, I was in the back doing inventory when I heard her voice through the partially open door, talking to a neighbor who had stopped in. She did not use any names. She said she had seen something that struck her as a little strange. That was all. But in a neighborhood like ours, strange without a name still finds a name. It just takes a few days and a few front porches. That same week, Daniel came home from a trip and made my favorite dinner without being asked. Pasta with homemade marinara and fresh basil from the little pot on the windowsill, the exact dish he had watched me order on our 3rd date and memorized, without telling me he was memorizing it. He set the table properly, lit a candle, and had Lily deliver a folded note to me that said, "I love you, Mom of my girl," in his handwriting. I sat down at that table, looked at the candle and the note, and the food, and I cried. He came around the table and held me, thinking I was moved by the gesture, which I was, but not in the way he understood. He said he knew he had been traveling too much, that he was going to cut back, that he saw how hard I was working to hold everything together. He held me while I kept my face pressed against his shoulder, so he could not see that the tears running down my face were not tears of relief or gratitude. They were the tears of a woman trapped between 2 lives, neither of which she could inhabit completely, trying to breathe inside a space that had grown too small for all of her. That same night after Daniel fell asleep, I opened the laptop. Lauren was online, but before I could type anything, I noticed that our entire conversation history was gone. She had deleted everything. No warning. No explanation. The chat window was completely empty, as if we had never exchanged a single word. The screen just sat there, blank and bright in the dark room. I stared at that empty screen for a very long time. I did not send a message. I closed the laptop and went to the bathroom, took out the journal, and wrote something I had never written before. The sentence said, "I think she is trying to stop." I read those 6 words several times. Then I closed the notebook and sat on the edge of the tub in the dark until I felt steady enough to go back to bed. Monday morning, she was on the sidewalk at the usual time. She said good morning. She smiled. She asked about Lily. I answered everything normally. But something had shifted in the space between us. 1 extra inch of distance that only I could measure. A fraction less warmth in the smile that only I would notice. And I did not ask her about it, because I was afraid of what the answer would sound like in the open air. On Thursday evening that week, Daniel sat beside me on the couch after Lily was asleep, took my hand the way he does when he has something important to say, and told me he thought it was time to try for another baby. He said Lily was getting to the right age, that he wanted to grow the family while we were still young enough to enjoy it, that he had been thinking about it for a while. He looked at me with so much hope in his face. A good man, an honest man, a man who loved me the way he had always loved me, completely and without suspicion. And I felt a real love for him in that moment, the kind that lives in the bones after years of shared life, the kind that hurt precisely because it was real, but it was not enough. I told him I needed some time to think about it. He said he understood, kissed my temple, and turned off the light on his side of the bed. We lay there in the dark, and I listened to his breathing slow into sleep, and I thought about how I was losing Lauren without her having left yet, and how her silence was hurting me in ways I had not known silence could. February settled over Nashville like a gray blanket that no one had asked for. Lauren faded from my routine the way fog moves in, so gradually you do not notice until you cannot see anything clearly anymore. The good mornings on the sidewalk continued, but they lasted less. Her screen name stayed green on AOL Instant Messenger, but she never started a conversation. Neither did I. We had arrived at a silence neither of us had agreed to out loud, but that both of us were keeping without discussion. On a Saturday afternoon, I went to the grocery store on Gallatin Road to pick up milk and fruit. I turned into the dairy aisle and she was there. standing with a woman from her school named Simone, both of them laughing at something on Simone's phone, completely at ease. Lauren looked up, saw me, and the laughter softened just slightly. She said, "Hey, Rachel," in that neighborly tone I recognized as the one she used when other people were present. I said, "Hey," back, asked if everything was going well. She said yes, and introduced Simone, and we said goodbye. In under a minute. I pushed my cart around the corner into the next aisle and stopped in front of the yogurt section without seeing any of it. I gripped the cart handle with both hands. I breathed. I picked up the wrong yogurt, realized it, put it back. I finished my shopping on autopilot and walked to my car without looking back toward the dairy aisle. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before starting the engine. That night I opened her profile on AOL. She had posted new pictures. Her and Simone at a bar downtown, laughing, drinks in hand, looking like two people having exactly the kind of uncomplicated evening I could not offer. It was close to 11 at night. I sat there looking at those pictures longer than was reasonable, knowing Simone was nobody, knowing I had no claim on Lauren's Friday nights, knowing everything my rational mind could tell me. And still, I lay awake until almost 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling. The following week, Lily's daycare teacher sent home a folded piece of construction paper. Inside was a crayon drawing. Lily had drawn her family the way 3-year-olds draw families. 4 round heads on stick bodies standing in a row on a green line of grass. The teacher had written a name beneath each figure in careful printed letters at Lily's instruction. Daddy, Mommy, Lily, and Miss Lauren. 4 figures. A family that did not exist on any legal document, but that lived completely and without apology inside my 3-year-old daughter's understanding of the world. I folded that drawing carefully and tucked it inside the journal. I did not show it to Daniel. He would have found it sweet, would have laughed at Lily's creativity, would have felt nothing beyond the innocent charm of a toddler's artwork. But I understood every crayon line of it. That drawing made by a child who could not yet read was the most honest thing anyone had shown me in months. I called my sister Diane that weekend. She lives over in Knoxville. We talk on the phone every week or two. But that call was different from the first hello. She answered bright and warm, asked about Lily and Daniel and the pharmacy. And somewhere in the middle of a pause I said, "Diane, I need to tell you something." I did not plan the words ahead of time. They just arrived. She was silent for the entire time I spoke. She did not interrupt once, did not make a sound that would indicate she was steering me toward any particular conclusion. When I finished, her voice was different, lower, more careful with itself. And she said, "Rachel, I already knew." I could not respond for a long moment. I asked her how. She said, "Because I have known you your whole life, and because you have never been completely happy the way you deserve to be happy." And I watched it for years and did not know what to say. I cried for a long time on that phone call. Diane stayed on the line for over an hour. She did not give advice. She did not tell me what I should do, or how I should do it, or what the consequences might be. She just stayed on the other end of the line and let me be honest out loud for the first time in my life. When I hung up, I felt lighter and heavier at the same moment. Lighter because the secret now lived with someone else. Heavier because saying it out loud makes it real in a way that thinking it never quite does. The following Sunday, I went to church with Daniel and Lily as always. The pastor preached about family values and about the importance of protecting the sanctity of the home. Midway through the sermon, he paused and said he wanted to address something that had come to his attention. Something concerning certain friendships in the community that had crossed into territory that was not spiritually healthy, particularly between women. He did not name anyone, but he looked once, briefly and deliberately, toward the section of pews where I was seated. I kept my eyes on the pulpit. Lily was in my lap. Daniel was beside me. My hands were folded in my lap in a way I hoped looked calm. Inside, it felt like the floor was dropping away beneath the pew, one slow inch at a time. Someone had spoken to the pastor. I did not know who. But I had a very strong feeling I knew exactly which direction that conversation had come from. I left that church on Sunday morning, knowing that time was running out, that the careful, quiet world we had built together was cracked in a place that could no longer be covered with our hands, and that I needed to talk to Lauren before someone else decided to do it for me. On Monday morning after that sermon, I sent Lauren a message on AOL asking her to come by the pharmacy after closing. She took almost an hour to respond. When she did, she said only okay. I spent the entire day with that one word in my head, counting down through every customer transaction, every prescription filled, every phone call answered, while the clock on the pharmacy wall moved with the particular cruelty of clocks that know you are watching them. When Sandra left and I flipped the sign from open to closed, Lauren was already on the sidewalk waiting. She came in without a word. She leaned against the counter with her arms crossed, looking at me with that closed expression I had learned to read over the months we had known each other. It was the expression of someone who is frightened, but has decided not to let the fright show. I recognized it because I had worn it myself more times than I could count. I was direct with her. I told her about the sermon. I told her someone had talked. She closed her eyes for 1 second, drew a slow breath, and said she had suspected something was moving through the neighborhood when Simone mentioned hearing things at the school where they both worked. We looked at each other across the quiet pharmacy, and then she said the sentence I had been dreading since the moment I sent that message asking her to come. She said, "Rachel, I think we need to stop." I did not raise my voice. I did not cry immediately. I asked her if that was what she truly wanted, or if it was fear doing the talking for her. She took a long time to answer. She said she no longer knew how to separate the two. That Cole was pushing harder than ever for a date. That the school principal was friends with Daniel's aunt who was on the school board and her job could be at risk if things escalated. That her mother back in Austin called every week asking when she and Cole were finally going to make it official. That there was too much pressing in from every direction. That she loved me. She said it exactly like that, with all the words in the right order for the first time. But that love was not always sufficient against the weight of everything surrounding it. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I walked to the front window and stood looking out at the street for a moment. Cars passing. The diner across the road pulling in its sidewalk sign for the night. A kid on a bicycle on the opposite sidewalk. The whole of ordinary life moving past the glass, while mine was quietly coming apart on the inside. Then I turned around and said, "I understand." She said, "I do not want you to understand. I want you to fight." I said, "I will not fight your fear, Lauren." She left that night without anything being truly resolved. I locked up the pharmacy, went to pick up Lily from Donna's house, and on the walk home I held my daughter's small hand without saying much. Lily told me about a butterfly that had landed on the window of the daycare classroom, about a song she had learned that morning, about something her friend Madison had said at snack time that had apparently been the funniest thing in recorded history. I listened to every word and responded to every word, and let none of what was happening inside me reach the surface. In the days that followed, Lauren disappeared again. No sidewalk mornings, no green light on the messenger. The silence this time was different from the February silence. That one had hesitation in it, the feeling of someone pausing before a decision. This one felt settled, final, and it hurt in a way that had no vocabulary I could find, because it was not the kind of pain you can explain to anyone without explaining everything that came before it. And then something happened that I had not expected. On a Tuesday afternoon in March, I was behind the pharmacy counter when the front door opened and Lauren walked in. No message ahead of time. No warning. Just her, standing in the doorway, looking different. Her hair was down, which I had rarely seen, loose around her shoulders. And her hands. I looked at her hands before I looked at her face. No ring. The engagement ring Cole had brought in December was gone from her finger. She stood in the doorway for one moment and we looked at each other across the length of the store. Sandra assessed the atmosphere with that instinct of hers and disappeared into the back room without being asked. Because whatever else Sandra was, she could read a room better than almost anyone I had ever met. Lauren walked toward the counter slowly and said I gave the ring back. I did not ask when. I did not ask how. I did not ask what the conversation had sounded like, or how long it had taken, or what Cole had said when he understood it was real. I just stood there on my side of the counter, letting the weight of those 5 words settle into me, like something I had not known I was waiting for. We went to my house that afternoon. We sat on the front porch. Lily was still at daycare. Daniel was out of town. We sat without speaking for a long time, watching the neighborhood move through its afternoon routine, listening to the birds and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. And then Lily's daycare van pulled up, and she came running up the front walk, saw Lauren sitting on the porch, and screamed Miss Lauren with the complete and unrestrained joy that only small children and golden retrievers are capable of producing. She launched herself across the porch, and Lauren caught her and held her and looked at me over the top of my daughter's curly head with a smile I had not seen in months. The real one, not the neighborly one, the one that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth. After a long moment, Lily wiggled down and grabbed one of Lauren's hands with one of her small hands and one of my hands with the other. She stood between us, looking up with the satisfied expression of someone who has just corrected something that was obviously wrong and cannot understand why it took the adults so long to sort it out. And the image locked itself into my memory the way certain images do, without asking permission, because they know they are going to be needed later. We sat on that porch until the sun went down. When Lauren finally got up to go home, she stopped at the top of the porch steps, turned back, and said I gave the ring back, because I realized I was with the wrong person. And staying with the wrong person out of fear is the most dishonest thing I know how to do. I did not answer. I watched her walk down the front path and turn onto the sidewalk and disappear around the corner. Then I took Lily inside, started her bath, and went to the bathroom to find the journal. But before I wrote a single word, I sat on the edge of the tub and understood something with the kind of clarity that only comes after a long confusion. Cole was out of the story. The largest outside obstacle had fallen. And yet I knew, in that same honest place in my chest where all the true things lived, that there was still a wall standing, the tallest one of all, and it had Daniel's name on it. March was the most beautiful and most difficult month of my life, running side by side without any space between them. Lauren was back, and we had returned to our rhythm with one important difference. Both of us now knew exactly what we were to each other. There were no more half words, no more pretending it was simply a close friendship that had gotten complicated. It was love, the kind that has weight and warmth and terror all wound together, the kind that does not ask for your permission before it rearranges everything. But Daniel was still there. Every dinner, every weekend morning, every ordinary Tuesday evening on the couch. A good man who had done nothing wrong and who deserved a woman who was entirely present. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror in the mornings and sat with that thought. That I was giving him a woman who was only partially there without him knowing it. That the unfairness of that was something I could no longer carry without it costing me something I could not afford to keep losing. Lauren and I talked about it on the evenings we spent together on the front porch while the neighborhood settled into night around us. She never pressured me. She never delivered ultimatums or sighs loaded with implication. She said she loved me, and that she would be there regardless of which road I chose. But I understood, without her saying it, that love without a future slowly loses its light. That we could not live indefinitely in the margins of other people's lives and call it enough. It was on a Thursday night that I sat down at the kitchen table after everyone was asleep and began to write a letter. Not a letter to Lauren, a letter to myself. An attempt to take everything living inside me and arrange it into words I could read without flinching. I wrote about Daniel, about Lily, about Lauren, about the fear and the church, and Donna and the neighborhood and the pharmacy, and my mother in Chattanooga, who did not yet know any of this, about all of it. I wrote for nearly 2 hours at that kitchen table, with the house completely quiet around me, and the clock on the microwave the only light besides the small lamp over the stove. When I finished, I read it through once. Then I folded it, put it in an envelope, and wrote on the front of the envelope in small, careful letters, "For no one." It was a farewell letter to the silence, a way of telling myself that I could no longer live hidden, one way or another. I did not yet know which way that would be, but I knew the current arrangement had an expiration and that I was the only one who could decide what came after it. I left the envelope on the kitchen table while I went to the refrigerator for a glass of water. It was close to midnight. Lily was asleep in her room. Daniel was 3 states away on a work trip. When I came back to the kitchen, the envelope was not on the table. I felt a jolt of alarm, looked at the floor, and then heard the small sound of Lily moving in the hallway. She had woken up to use the bathroom, passed through the kitchen on her way back, seen the envelope on the table, and done exactly what every 3-year-old does with a piece of paper left within reach. I moved quietly into the hallway and saw Lily padding in her footed pajamas toward the front door with the envelope in her hand. That particular sleepwalking determination of a toddler operating somewhere between dreaming and awake. I said her name softly, so as not to startle her. She stopped, turned, looked at me with heavy eyes, and said in the matter-of-fact voice of a child reporting a completed task, "I gave it to Miss Lauren." I looked at the front door. It was ajar. Lily had unlocked the latch, walked out into the hallway of our building, and slid the envelope under Lauren's door while I was standing 10 feet away in the kitchen pouring water. I carried Lily back to her bed, tucked her in, and sat on the edge of her mattress until her breathing went deep and even, which took approximately 90 seconds, because she was already most of the way asleep before I got her horizontal. Then I went to the living room and sat on the couch in the dark without turning on a lamp. The letter was on the other side of that hallway, with everything I had written in it, every true thing I had not had the courage to say out loud, in Lauren's hands. I waited for her to knock on my door. Nothing. I waited for my phone to light up. Nothing. Midnight, 12:30, 1 in the morning. I went to the window and looked across the small gap between our units and could see the light on in her bedroom. She was awake. She was reading. I knew she was reading. And I stood there in my dark living room looking at her lit window, not breathing quite right, until I finally made myself go back to the couch and sit down. In the morning, Lauren was not on the sidewalk at the usual time. I went to work with my stomach in a knot, could not eat breakfast, went through the morning transactions the way you go through things when your mind is somewhere else entirely. Sandra commented twice that I seemed distracted. I told her I had not slept well. She brought me coffee without being asked, and left it on the counter without making it into a conversation, which was the kindest thing she could have done. At noon, my phone buzzed on the counter beside the register. I looked at the screen. It was a text from Lauren. It said only this. I read every word. "And you are the bravest person I have ever known." I stood behind that pharmacy counter for the rest of the afternoon with that sentence living in my chest. Bravest. Me, who had spent months deleting conversations and tearing pages out of journals and looking away at the wrong moments and saying I am fine when I was the furthest thing from fine. She called me brave for writing in a letter what I had not been able to say standing in the same room. And that word, coming from her, landed with more weight than anything anyone had ever said to me in my life. When I got home that evening, Daniel had come back early from the trip and was on the living room floor, playing with Lily and a set of wooden blocks. He looked up when I came in, smiled, and said he had missed us. Lily abandoned the blocks immediately and ran to me with her arms up. I picked her up, held her against my chest, felt her small arms around my neck, and looked over her shoulder at my husband sitting on the floor in the warm light of our living room. And I understood with a completeness I had been building toward for months that my life as it was structured could no longer hold all of what I actually was, and that the most loving thing I could do for everyone in that room, including myself, was to finally be honest about it. April arrived in Nashville the way April always does, without asking permission, throwing open every window and flooding the streets with dogwood blossoms and the particular green that only exists in Tennessee in the spring. The Bradford pear trees on our block were white and extravagant, petals drifting down onto the sidewalks in the morning breeze like something out of a painting. I had always loved April in Nashville. That year, for the first time, I understood why it had always felt like it was trying to tell me something. The conversation with Daniel happened on a Wednesday night. He waited until Lily was asleep, turned off the television, and came to sit beside me on the couch with that steadiness of his that had always disarmed me before I even knew what was coming. He put his hands in his lap, looked forward for a moment, and then looked at me. And I knew before he opened his mouth that this conversation was going to change the architecture of everything. He did not shout. He did not slam anything. He did not do any of the things I had spent weeks imagining in the dark after he fell asleep. He said he had noticed I was different for a long time. That at first he thought it was exhaustion from the pharmacy or stress or something hormonal that would pass on its own. That then he started to notice the difference had an address. That every time Lauren's name entered a conversation, something shifted in my expression for a fraction of a second that he had taught himself to recognize over months of paying attention to it. I did not deny it. I still do not know exactly where that came from, that absence of denial, but it was there, and I let it be there. I sat looking at my hands in my lap for a long time. And then I said, I do not know how to explain what I am feeling in a way that will make sense. He said it does not need to make sense. It needs to be true. And I looked at him and said, it is true, Daniel. I do not fully understand it yet, but it is true. The silence after that lasted close to 5 minutes. I counted. We sat on the same couch we had sat on for 5 years of marriage, in the same living room with the same lamp and the same framed pictures on the same walls, and the silence had a physical weight I will never be able to adequately describe. He stared at the rug. I watched his face. And then he asked me a question I had not been prepared for. He asked Rachel, have you ever been happy here? Not are you happy now? Ever. Have you ever been truly happy? That question split me down the center, because the honest answer was too complicated to live in a single word. I told him I had been happy, that he was a genuinely good man, and that I had never doubted that the problem was not him and had never been him, that something had lived inside me long before he came into my life, something I had buried so successfully that I had nearly convinced myself it was gone. He listened to every word without interrupting. When I finished, he got up from the couch, walked to the window, and stood with his back to me for a long time. When he turned around, there were tears on his face. Daniel, who in 5 years of marriage I had seen cry exactly once at his father's funeral, was standing in our living room on a Wednesday night with tears running down his face, and that was harder to sit with than any anger would have been. Because anger is about the person who is angry. Tears are about the person who caused them. And I had caused those tears in a man who had not deserved them. He said he needed time to think, that he was not going to make any decisions that night, that he was going to sleep in the guest room, and that he had one request. He asked me not to go to Lauren that night. I told him I would not, and I kept my word. I sat on that couch for hours after he went down the hall, listening to the house breathe around me, understanding that my marriage had ended in that conversation, even though neither of us had used that word yet. In the morning, Daniel woke early, made coffee, said good morning to Lily as if the world were the same as it had been 24 hours before. He was that kind of father, the kind who protects his child from everything, including his own pain. Lily ate her breakfast in his lap, without knowing that her parents' world had shifted on its axis the previous night. I made toast. I put out the juice. I sat across the table from my family, and we performed normalcy for 40 minutes out of pure love for the 3-year-old who was eating her eggs and talking about a caterpillar she had seen on the playground. When Lily left for daycare and Daniel left for work, I went to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and cried. Not from relief, not from grief, not from regret in any clean and simple form. I cried from all of it simultaneously. The way the body releases what the mind has been managing for too long, without category and without apology. I stayed on that bathroom floor for close to an hour. Then I washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror for a long, steady moment, and went to open the pharmacy. Sandra knew the moment I walked through the door. She did not ask. She put a cup of coffee in my hand before I had taken my coat off, squeezed my shoulder once, and said, "You do not have to tell me anything. Just know I am here." And that sentence, from a woman who had once unintentionally set a fire she did not know how to put out, made me feel that people are genuinely capable of being better than their worst moments. That Sandra standing there with that cup of coffee was proof of it. That week, I sent Lauren a message telling her what had happened. She responded carefully, and with a gentleness I had needed without knowing how to ask for it. She said, "You were so brave." I told her I felt destroyed and lighter than I had in years at the same time. She sent back a single period, and I understood that she was crying on her end of that conversation, and I loved her for not pretending otherwise. On Friday evening, Daniel came home at his normal time. We had dinner, the three of us. Lily performed an original song she had apparently composed during nap time at daycare. Daniel did the dishes. I gave Lily her bath, and when the house was quiet and Lily was asleep and Daniel had gone to the guest room with a quiet good night, I went out to the front porch. The April night was warm and smelled like the Bradford pear blossoms and the neighbor's dinner and the particular sweetness of a Tennessee spring evening. I sat in the porch chair and looked out at the street and thought that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop pretending to be whole when you are in pieces, and that the people who truly love you will eventually understand that, even when it breaks them first. Lauren came out of her front door at almost the same moment, carrying 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She had not texted ahead. She just came. She handed me a mug and sat in the other porch chair, and we looked out at Maple Grove together in the warm dark. After a while, she said, "You know, this is just the beginning, right?" I said I know. That there was still so much road ahead. Conversations I had not yet had. With my mother in Chattanooga. With Donna. With Lily when she was old enough to ask the questions that were waiting for her. With the church community and the neighborhood and all the ordinary complicated human machinery of a life being reorganized from the foundation up. Lauren said I know. But we face it together. I reached across and took her hand. She held mine back, and we sat there on that porch in the warm April dark, 2 mugs of tea going slowly cold between us, while Nashville breathed its spring night all around us, and Maple Grove went quietly about the business of being a neighborhood on an ordinary Friday. And for the first time in longer than I could accurately remember, I was not looking over my shoulder. I was not calculating or hiding or managing or pretending. I was just sitting on my own front porch holding the hand of the person I loved while the dogwood petals drifted down in the dark. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.